This is Six African Trade Talks. Six African Trade Talks is a media partner of Intra-Africa Trade Fair, an initiative of Afreximbank in collaboration with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat and the African Union. In this episode, our guest is Hio Sola-Usidame. Hio Sola is the CEO and founder of One Port 365. Hio, welcome to Six African Trade Talks. How are you?
I'm great, Charles. Thank you very much for having me.
So Hio Sola, take us through your background. How did you start?
Awesome. So I'll give a big background of my time before One Port 365. I grew up, spent a lot of my years, teenage years, and high school, university, post-university, growing up in the UK, working for a couple of players in the EPC space, focused on the freight. In 2016, in the middle of a crash in the energy space, moved to Nigeria. And it was like, I tell people this, I moved to Nigeria only let me take a break. And it's been 8 years now I've been in Africa. 7 years I've been in Africa, and I'm addicted and I'm going nowhere. So it's a land of opportunities. 2016 moved to Nigeria to take a break. And then from taking a break, I came across some fantastic opportunities and solutions that I felt we could actually deploy to the freight space in terms of movement of cargo. Starting off, first of all, movement of cargo from northern Nigeria to southern Nigeria using the railway. From there, we had customers who were demanding, okay, since you're supporting us in terms of export movement, why don't you support in terms of port operations? And that's how I became a freight forwarder in Nigeria, one of the youngest at that stage. 2017 got licensed as a freight forwarder in Nigeria, which can be a bit of a process, and started supporting multinationals, the likes of Tolerant Group, the likes of Bajaj, the tricycle companies, the likes of Schneider Electrics, in basically port operations, clearing of cargo at mostly Lagos port, and also supporting exporters who are exporting agro-allied commodities from northern Nigeria to mostly China and Europe. And it was in the midst of this, basically it was what I'll call a successful SME freight forwarder, basically, because as a matter of fact, it was a freight forwarding business we started from nothing. And what I mean, nothing, no office, nothing. The car was the office, no funding or anything. Within the space of 3 years, we had grown the business to turnover of about $400,000 within the space of 3 years, and just minimal staff. But it was while running that, it was very easy to see the challenges in the freight forwarding space in Africa. And a lot of those challenges were factored and basically was centered around 4 key things. The booking process was highly fragmented. The payment process was absolutely broken. There was zero visibility on a lot of cargo moving. So there was a lot of theft going on in the system. And the last thing was there was too much paper and pen involved in documentation. And that was what actually led to One Port 365. And starting One Port 365 based on how do we solve these challenges. And 2020, I'll say 2020 officially started One Port 365, and it has going to become a fantastic venture, supporting importers and exporters in 3 major markets right now, and streamlining their freight forwarding and freight management process, basically simply using the platform. It's been fun. It's had its challenges. I can tell you that Africa is a very dynamic market. I've learned a lot in my time, basically running operations, working with the team, and growing our operations across the 3 markets in Africa. So that's a bit of a background on myself, basically starting from working out of London for an EPC player and finding myself in the shores of Africa and being addicted to Africa and providing solutions to commodity traders who are trading cross-border in Africa.
Interesting. What a journey. Thank you very much for sharing. What is your business function and what problem are you solving?
So we're mostly solving what I'll call the challenges faced by cross-border traders who are moving cargo. And I'm talking of importers and exporters into the African continent, where we're solving challenges that are factored around 4 key things. There are numerous challenges faced by these guys. And trust me, before starting One Port, I had spent almost 6 months spending time with commodity traders, mostly who were mostly in northern Nigeria, Geez, I must commend most of those guys in terms of the resilience. And I tell people this, I'll never do commodity trading myself in Africa, right? Because it's exceptionally tough. It's exceptionally tough. For so many of these guys, especially the exporter guys, they have to deal with issues around insecurity in bringing out their commodities from the hinterlands and the farmlands in northern Nigeria. And then they have to bring it to a major gathering center. Now, they have to bring it to a major gathering center and they have to rent a warehouse for a period of a year, even though they're in season for 4 to 6 months in a year. For example, after you're cleaning bits and pieces and then the cargo is ready to go, what you typically get is it takes as much as 10 to 14 days for traders, exporters to be able to make a booking for cargo from their warehouse location, wherever it is in northern Nigeria, to destination. So you're moving cargo from, let's say, what's it called now, from Kano, which is in northern Nigeria, and it's going to, let's say, Rotterdam. You typically will have to reach out to 10 to 15 different trucking partners. And I can tell you, those 10 to 15 different trucking partners, 90% of them will disappoint you. You typically have to reach out to clearing agents, basically, and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Then you typically have to reach out to a warehouse manager, a warehouse that you can transport your cargo, most likely in a port city, in like Lagos or, sorry, apologies for that, like Lagos or One, which is southern Nigeria, South Nigeria. Then you typically have to, most importantly, reach out to shipping lines. And I can tell you 3 years ago, there were only 2 or 3 shipping lines that had online booking platforms for you to be able to book rates. So when you go through this whole process of a commodity trader, what you realize you spend 10 to 14 days, and in most cases, you've not been able to actually get a final quote on how much that process is. So for us, we said, how do we solve this? And we need to make Africa as competitive. For Africa to develop, it needs to be able to compete in the global scene, right? And so when the traders who are at the forefront of the backbone of trade can't compete because there's so many bottlenecks involved in terms of movement of cargo, then you think to yourself, what are we doing here? And so for us, our first mission at 1.365 was, how do we make trade in terms of booking trade or booking freight as simple as booking a flight ticket to fly from, let's say, Lagos to Kigali, right? So 30 years ago, you're trying to buy a flight ticket. And what do? You go to the airport, wherever your destination or your origin is. And what do? You queue up. And then they call all sorts of airlines and say, what's the price? Or back in the day, you also had a travel agent. And you use a travel agent, and then after a day, he comes back to you with a price, and you make a booking. And now, there are numerous platforms whereby you can book an airline ticket within the space of a minute, right? So for what is the major backbone for global trade, why is it taking 10 to 14 days to be able to make a booking, right? Why do we have cargo moving on the road? In West Africa, especially like Nigeria, only 20% of cargo moving on the road, containerized cargo, has visibility on it. So what is that? Basically, cargo, $300,000 is being taken from a port location to a warehouse with zero visibility on it. So what does that mean? There's situations where theft exists, and there's data to actually prove that. So our mission basically was to simplify the booking process. So what we've done is what I said that happens in a 10 to 14 days process, which is the booking process. We've been able to simplify it to a booking process that can be completed in less than 2 minutes. So we've cut down a booking process that typically takes 10 to 14 days. We've brought everybody on the platform, shipping lines, warehouses, marine insurance partners, clearing agents, which we are licensed to do, trucking partners, onto a platform, and then you can book all the services and you can compare rate seeking providers on a single platform. Now, you just can't, it's not just a case of you can book. You can basically also get 100% visibility on your cargo. You can make payments via the platform. And most importantly, we're developing a system whereby you can basically print all your shipping documents via our platform. Very critical. In the midst of COVID 3 years ago, what you had basically was you had exporters going to shipping lines and queuing up on a daily basis to obtain documents so they can get paid for the shipment. Why are we still printing out documents? Why are we still getting involved in pen and paper in African trade? So that's the key bit. That's what we're supporting. We've grown significantly since we started. First year, we had just 5 B2B. So we're a pure B2B play. First year, we had just 5 B2B accounts. As of last year, we were bordering, give or take, about 80 B2B accounts that we deal with. We've grown from one location, which was Lagos, to currently in Nigeria, we have 3 locations. In Ghana, we've grown from one location, which was Lagos. Now we have 3 locations in Nigeria. We're fully operational in Ghana, and we're fully operational in Kenya, which was our latest opening. We started in Kenya just a couple of weeks ago. So that's super exciting news for us. So we supported exporters, I can name it, from the major exporters to the small scale exporters, and also we've supported importers to be able to generate better freight rates for their cargo originating from mostly the Far East Asian trade lane and all that. So it's been a super exciting time for us at One Port, grown in terms of numbers and in terms of manpower. And yes, we're super excited about what we're doing and how we're supporting African traders.
Interesting, especially when we are now in the space of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
Right.
It's interesting that you are adding value in that space.
Correct, yes.
Have you raised any funding? And
yes, we have.
Yeah,
we have raised funding. Obviously, we're quite aware about what the market is right now. So the first year we started, which was first full financial year, which was 2020, fully bootstrapped. So fully bootstrapped in terms of no external funding. 2021, we did a very tiny raise, which we closed very quickly. We raised just about $500,000. That led to 5x in terms of growth. 2022, we also raised again in the middle of 2022, if I'm correct. I think about Q2 2022. We raised over $5 million. I'll probably think about 5+ or something. And it was that round was led by Mobility 54, fantastic investors, great support from the team as well. And we had quite a number of also VCs joining, including Flexport, which is the largest digital freight forwarding platform in the world. So we've raised, understand the current scenario for African startups. I think we were able to raise just before that, should I call it, that headwind started. And we're grateful for that opportunity, and we're grateful for that trust that investors have had in us.
Thank you very much for sharing. It's definitely an interesting time in terms of fundraising and trying to raise.
Correct.
But I think it's also important to start exploring opportunities to raise in Africa, because there are some areas where there is access to funding in Africa. And I think we need to see how we can transform that so that whilst we are affected by global issues, but we might have a fallback plan, which is something happening in Africa.
Correct. That's very correct. Exactly. Yes. There's a lot we can actually do within Africa. If we come together and work in unity, I think that the potentials are significantly enormous.
Certainly. In terms of your fundraising process, what would you say are typical costs or costs you incurred, either through traveling and the likes?
I would say, I don't want to use the word we've been lucky. I must say we've had super fantastic investors who've backed us from our first raise, and we've been able to bank on the network of these investors who've introduced us to, I tell people this, who've introduced us to other investors who've come in at the further rounds. So in terms of, I know quite a number of founders and co-founders and friends, and I know so many scenarios where they've had to go to the US, get on the road and bits and pieces. We've not really ever had to do that, of which I'm grateful for. We've tapped into a network, and the first round of investors who came in, we did fantastically well, super impressed with the results. When you deliver numbers and when you're able to deliver what you promise, I think it's always, I keep saying this, money would always chase good deals, no matter how bad the scenario is and no matter how bad the market is. So if there's a good deal, you can trust me that the funding is going to come out. So the numbers proved to be good. That led to more doors and more relationships, more people who believe and understood what we're trying to do. Our model is very unique in terms of digital freight forwarding in Africa. So it was a game changer. And I think a lot of people wanted to jump on that bandwagon. So we actually went out to raise, about 2.5 million, but we ended up raising about 5.5, and it was significantly oversubscribed. I would say I don't use the word lucky. It makes it sound very simple. It was not that simple, but we were able to tap into a very good network of existing investors who did a lot of introduction and who were able to bring out others to the table. And that was super great for us.
Perfect. I was talking to one of our past podcast guests from Vital Capital. His name is Nimrod Geber. And he was explaining this whole process of making sure that you have a network that you can on that will help you get to that process of fundraising. So definitely
I advise any founder, that's something you really don't want to underplay or you don't want to underrate. It's super important. And I think also it's very important that you build trust with your investors. Investors are human, right? So when the most important thing is openness. So when things are not going well, do you have a plan? Okay, things would never always go well, right? You have situations whereby there will be headwinds, but do you have a plan? Okay, so you've identified this is a problem. This is how we're looking to solve it. And as long as communication is there, I think that's probably always a winner. Openness is very critical, and I think that's always a winner.
Certainly. Thank you very much for sharing. Before we continue, I would like to hear a word from our partners. Let's look at you're operating in Africa, and you spoke about how expensive it is to travel across a continent. What has been your travel experience, and where do you think we could improve as a continent?
So my travel experience has been focused within West and East Africa, because we felt maybe those were where opportunities were most for one port. So I spent a lot of time mostly within Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. It's been interesting, I must say. And I must say this, especially on a platform like this, which is a lot more African focused. I was one of those Africans whereby I've been to everywhere in Europe, I've been to everywhere in North Africa and North America. But before 3 years ago, I think the only place I've actually been to was Ghana and probably Ivory Coast. And those were very short trips, 4 or 5 days, and they were like mini holidays. And so we Africans don't actually move within Africa, which is very unfortunate. And there are reasons for that, I can say. Obviously, interconnectivity within Africa is still a major challenge. Cost of movement is still a major challenge to a large extent. But one of the things I would say, which again might sound a bit stupid, but coming from someone who never really traveled within Africa, I thought before I started moving within Africa, I thought it was, the challenges were quite similar, especially for what we were trying to solve. And it hit me in the right way very quickly that was not correct. The challenges are a bit similar, but the approach can be quite different. I'll use that word. Traveling in Africa has actually made me a lot more open-minded in terms of understanding cultures, understanding the ways different problems are solved, understanding a different market approach. And I tell people this, in Nigeria, we're very used to a very, what did I use? We call it Gragra in Nigeria, right? It's a very, super focused on getting things delivered. So we go the extra mile and we're very hungry for the deal, if I use that word. And then I started traveling across Africa, and then you tried working in the same mode, and people look at you like, calm down. You understand? Because there's still other ways of actually solving business challenges. So it's made me a lot more open-minded, understanding different approaches to business and different markets. And that has been something that has significantly developed me, not just as a person, but also as a leader in this space. I'll use that word. And that's been a good thing. What can we do to develop? I think there's a lot more that can be done, especially when it regards to trade in Africa. A lot more. I can give you stories and stories for days that can be done to support more trade within countries in Africa, not just trade, but also the movement of talent. Talent is a big problem right now in certain markets. I think if we can open up such opportunities for easy movement of cargo, easy movement of goods, easy movement of people across locations, I think the speed and execution for growth within Africa would probably 10x within a space of years. And that's something we need to significantly look at. Opportunities are there. I tell people this, opportunities are in Africa. It's endless. And opportunities to do things the right way and still make some very, very good business cases but we need people who have that exposure, have those ideas to be able to solve it. And so we need to ensure that there's an easy movement of goods, easy movement of personnel within Africa. And I think that's probably the most important step to actually ensuring that we take this to the next level in the continent.
You said something that is quite powerful. Movement of talent. We can always look about movement of people, movement of goods, services, but talent, because majority of our talent is going outside Africa. And
Absolutely correct.
And you find that when they get there, they realize that, okay, it's actually not, it's not the best yet. Good. It's crazy, yeah?
Sure. I know, very crazy. It's ridiculous, right? And I tell people this, especially on the talent end, for a startup, when you're starting, when people ask you, okay, what do you need to take things to the next level? And then in most cases, you're saying, oh, we need to fundraise, we need money, we need to be able to scale this using funds. Then we raised that we realized actually money was not necessarily the problem. Our biggest challenge, even to date in one pot, is actually talent, especially in some of the key markets we work in. And then also, so it's talent based on the fact that some of the things we're doing with no one else has done in the continent, but also that also hasn't been helped by the fact that you look at, you just rightly said, there is a significant immigration going on in Africa right now. It's ridiculous in terms of talent. And like you rightly said, we've seen people who've left and then come back and say, hey, I didn't like it out there. Can I come back and get my 31 degrees every day? Literally scenario. And, you know, if Africa is going to develop, right, it can only be developed by we Africans. That's the reality of it. No one's going to fall from heaven and say, okay, I'm going to start working on it. So we need to be significantly committed to ensuring that we're doing the right things for the continent. And it would involve sacrifices, it would involve pain points. But the only way we can take this to the next step is by ensuring that we have the right talents who stay back as much as possible. We have the governments and we have the different governments having policies that are startup friendly, youth friendly, innovative friendly, and co. And ensuring that we can take this to the next step. No one else can develop Africa except for us. So we need to be at the bedrock of that in reality. So talent is very critical for us, especially for us at one point. I can go into stories, but again, obviously I'm cautious of time. Yeah, but hopefully we should be on the right path. That's what we're optimistic about.
Certainly. And we look forward to seeing more Africans going across the continent instead of going elsewhere. Why not Nigeria? Why not go to Kenya?
Exactly.
Not go to Uganda and the like. So, yeah.
Exactly. Awesome.
Scalability of your business under the Africa Continental Trade Area. How do you see yourself in a minute? How would you explain?
I see African Free Trade Continental Agreement as a significant game changer. Obviously, I'm going to keep it within a minute. I can tell you about this for 10 minutes, what we've done in alignment of African free trade, but I'll keep it with it. I see it as a game changer because the typical trade routes, especially for exports, has been the movement of raw materials from Africa to Europe. And there has never really been that opportunity whereby a trader who's based out of Abuja in Nigeria can see Bamako as an equal market to the way he sees Lagos in reality. So for the continent being opened up, it would mean there significantly much more opportunities for trade to happen between nations, between locations, and between different markets. That's something we're super excited about. When we look at our books in one port, for export customers, about 70+% of that is going to the Far East, right? And then probably about 20+% is going to Europe. And then less than 5% is going to Africa. But with the full implementation, we're optimistic and we're hopeful that can actually go to where African trade, we're seeing a lot more movement from Bamako in Mali, and it's going to Durban in South Africa. We're super excited about opportunities like that. And I think I tell people this, I said Warport was in reality built for this opportunity. But I'm obviously cautious about a minute, but just to add one or two things, but for that to happen, we need to do a lot more in terms of utilization of existing infrastructure, creation and building of new infrastructure, and opening of new trade lanes. And I'll say that for the purpose of using an example. So for quite a while ago, literally just about a couple of months or just maybe about a year, I remember we had a booking for a customer who wanted to move, what's it called now? Wanted to move, yeah, I think it was to Sugam from northern Nigeria, and it was going to Bujumbura in Burundi, right? And I thought, okay, this is interesting. We looked at the train lane and the journey map and then looked at it and thought to yourself, okay, how's this going to work? And unfortunately, he couldn't proceed with the transaction because it was ridiculously expensive and it was just going to take forever. I'll tell you how the trade was going to work. He was going to move the cargo to, and again, this is Africa to Africa. He was going to move the cargo to Lagos port in Nigeria. And then the cargo was going to go to Rotterdam in Holland. Okay. He was going to stay to Rotterdam for about 2.5, 3 weeks. And then from Rotterdam, he was going to move to either the port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania or the port of Mombasa. I think we found out that Dar es Salaam was actually better for the customer, if I recollect now, right? And then from Dar es Salaam, he was going to truck it. And I remember very well trucking it from Dar es Salaam to Bujumbura was about $3,000 a container. Now, when we summed up the cost of that transaction on a per container basis, I think it was borderline just about $10,000 for a container moving within Africa. But if you do the same transaction to going to China, it will cost you probably a third of that value. So how do we simplify this process? And that's the question I'm going to leave you with. And I'm hoping we get the right audience on this podcast who can listen to things like this and say, that just sounds crazy. How do we ensure that we're providing solutions and solutions that actually work to ensure that trade can be simplified within Africa? I think that's very important.
Powerful. Thank you very much for sharing. Any podcast or book you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I read also. I read some great books. Currently, I'm reading some books on growth, which I think are very interesting books. Currently reading Masters of Scale, which is one that I've read a couple of times, but I just read it most times to remind myself of certain things. And that's a book I'll definitely recommend because I've read it quite a number of times. I read it probably 4 or 5 times. Very, very insightful, especially into scaling as a startup and growing businesses. And that's something I would say anyone can actually tap into. And yeah, very insightful book.
To support our show, please leave a review and share this episode. You can also connect with us on social media using the handles in our show notes or visit our website, scixpodcast.africa. See you next time.